in line with the London Climate Action Week. So on the road to COP26, we're going to be looking at investing in local solutions to global challenges, and joined by a really great panel today. We're going to be hearing a lot from them. Welcome everybody, just in the nick of time. And we will be running for an hour today. Please do submit some questions in the chat function if you would like to, and I'll feed those in or address the panelists at the end of the session. Just to say, obviously, this isn't any financial advice in any way, and this isn't a financial promotion. So we're just going to be learning some more about this area and also hear from our great panelists. So without further ado, let's just say hi to everybody. So perhaps we'll go Helen, Rick, Andy, Nick, and then Marianne. And if you could just say hello and who you are, and then I'll give an introduction.
Hi, I'm Helen Woodcock. I'm from Kindling Trust and Kindling Farm, and I'm a co-founder of both those organisations. We'll be chatting more about that.
Hi there, I'm Rick Casali. I'm a trustee of Carbon Copy, and Carbon Copy is a climate action charity, and we focus on helping local councils, community groups, companies work collaboratively on local projects.
Off you go, Andy.
Hi everybody. So my name's Andy O'Brien, and I'm a co-founder and director of Bristol Energy Cooperative.
Hi, my name is Nick Robbins. I'm a professor in practice for sustainable finance at the London School of Economics. The LSE, we're part of a group called the Place-Based Climate Action Network, and I am chairing the finance platform for that. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a few minutes. Thanks.
Hello everyone, my name is Marianne Heaslip. I am a co-founder and director at Powered Retrofit, which is a new service for householders wanting to retrofit their homes. Based in Manchester, has been set up as a collaboration between Carbon Corp and Urbed, who I also work for.
That's lovely, thanks everyone. So just to say as well, we were to be joined by Luke Murphy today from the Institute for Public Policy Research, but unfortunately he has come down with a migraine. So I'll be just covering off a few points from his excellent report, and we'll send through a link afterwards as well. So in the events of the past year, I think that it has driven home the importance of communities, and certainly at Ethex we've seen renewed enthusiasm in financing and investing in communities. So in London and across the UK, community organisations are taking grassroots action to challenge some of the biggest problems we face as a society, including climate change. And I think we've become acutely aware in the lead up to COP that the responsibilities of governments and global leaders to take decisive action when it comes to climate change is extremely important, but we're also seeing a surge in community empowerment. So people from all walks of life taking matters into their own hands and really getting stuck into providing community-owned renewable energy, approaching new approaches to sustainable land and food production, retrofitting energy efficiency technologies to homes, and providing fair access to electric charging infrastructure for cars to fuel the clean transport revolution, which is excellent. And we're going to be hearing from some of the organisations who are really doing well in this area in a moment. So in this panel discussion, we're going to be looking at the appetite for local action, how and why it works, and to celebrate some of these pioneering initiatives who are trying to address climate change by taking action on their doorstep. So we'll talk about how power is held within the hands of communities to start making a difference whilst we wait for government to take action. So looking at these everyday people making incredible strides to deliver on these projects, and how these organisations are actually funded by everyday people who are investing alongside institutional investors using their own money to take a stand against the climate crisis, and who are really looking at trying to use money as a power for good, and that's very much what we hope to inspire within Ethex, with our tagline, of course, of making money do good. So Nick, I'd like to come to you first. So if you could talk to us about the role of communities and people power finance to accelerate our net zero ambitions. And what are the key barriers to achieving this? And what do you think some of the solutions are?
Well, thanks, Lisa. Really good to be with you and the rest of the panel and people on the line. So, I mean, just to sort of, I suppose, kick off that we're just taking the net zero side, so driving our emissions down to zero as a country well before 2050. This is the most important decade. Investment precedes emissions reduction. So a report I did for the Committee on Climate Change, the Road to Net Zero Finance, set out that annual extra net zero investment needs to grow fivefold this decade, from 10 billion a year to 50 billion a year, and then it will peak in the 2030s. So actually, this is the decade of big effort, and obviously we're seeing lots of take up by banks, by investors, by other parts of the financial system, by the Treasury, and so on. We'll have a green sovereign bond issued by the government, and so on. But I think the community dimension is really important. Just as a sort of little highlight of what the work we do. The Place-Based Climate Action Network has been set up particularly to support particular communities and regions to take place-based action, and we're working particularly in Leeds and Yorkshire, in Edinburgh, Scotland, Belfast, Northern Ireland, and also in other parts of the country, including Surrey and many other parts of the country. And I work on the finance area, which is essentially how do we connect the increasing desire of investors, individuals, but also individuals in their pension funds and so on, to finance net zero with actually the projects on the ground, which are going to be needed. So at the community level. So that's the sort of work we've been doing. We've also set up a group called the Finance and Just Transition Alliance, which again is really thinking about the justice part of finance. So that's just a bit of context. This is the big decade that we need to shift. Just I suppose maybe a bit why the community dimension is so important, because clearly you could think, well, isn't this all going to be done by big financial institutions and so on? So I suppose the first thing is that communities are a source of ambition. Actually, this is where a lot of the ambition for net zero and other forms of action, whether on nature or resilience or indeed on sort of social inclusion, that's coming. So that is really important to make sure we have both businesses but also financial mechanisms that actually enable that ambition to be realized and scaled up. So that's number one. The second is clearly community-based action is often very place-based, and that's a really important piece of this, that actually, although we have national targets and global targets, actually the delivery of that will happen in places very different, whether rural or post-industrial or urban, suburban, different issues in terms of justice issues, in terms of racial diversity and so on and so forth. So that's really really important. And then that flows into the inclusion aspect. A core part of the community investment strategy is really closing this often artificial divide between green investing and sort of social impact investing. And then finally, why is the sort of community investing so important is because actually communities have financial resources. A piece of work that Abundance did for us for PCAN highlighted that on average, for every 100,000 people in the UK, there's about £4 billion worth of investable assets, pensions, ISAs, bank savings, and so on. But we know that precious little of that money is actually devoted to investments in people's own communities and regions. So I think the work of Ethex, of Abundance, and all the people on the panel to actually have mechanisms which can enable people to invest in their communities in climate action, but also in economic and social renewal is absolutely key. And we've seen mechanisms such as the community municipal investments on the sort of local authority side. So I think why this is so important. I think some of the challenges that remain clearly is actually building up those pieces of sort of connective tissue between enterprises and community groups and sources of finance. So we need platforms who can connect people who have finance with those who need it. And I think also we're going to need to have sort of community finance and community investment being really recognised as a priority by the government, as a way of enabling its strategy. So a big thing coming down this year will be the government's net zero strategy, which will come out before COP. And interesting report from the Committee on Climate Change just last week was doing a sort of scorecard of government progress, highlighting the importance of net zero strategy. But a couple of things they really highlighted that really need to sort of come forward and where we need more work is firstly a plan for just transition to make sure that the drive to green also drives down inequality and doesn't necessarily lead to stranded workers, stranded communities, stranded regions, but also a framework for local delivery. Again, that is where I think the focus on community finance, community enterprise really comes in. So this is a really important moment to really show the success of what's been happening, highlight some of those barriers, and get it locked into national policy. So a couple of sort of thoughts as we sort of, what could that mean? I think clearly there's a role for government. I think maybe agencies like the British Business Bank, which is there to support SMEs, to actually say, should they have a particular focus on supporting social enterprises, community-based enterprises, and so on as part of their rollout of their areas? Is there work in which community initiatives, finance and community enterprises can be linked maybe with anchor institutions in regions? I think the potential to maybe to partner with, for example, water utilities, really interesting, large landholders, they're going to be around whatever happens in those regions. Are there areas where actually partnering with big anchor institutions, maybe some of the public sector, health sector or others and so on? I think that's another. Clearly, we have community development finance institutions which are doing great work in these areas. I think there's more to be seen there. And then one of the things we're developing in this PCAN network, the Place-Based Climate Action Network, is what we're calling place-based climate finance platforms. Because we do see there's a missing middle, that there's a lot of energy in communities, in local areas and so on to really move forward. But actually developing that project pipeline, developing maybe some of developing the projects, maybe bringing involved sort of public finance, blending finance, reducing risk and so on. That isn't really there. We don't really have that. So maybe at a regional level, we could have that sort of platform which could work with local authorities, with communities, with government groups, the new UK Infrastructure Bank, with private finance to actually build that really exciting blend of projects. So that's one thing that we're going to be developing this year. And then just to add that in the sort of report of the Finance and Just Transition Alliance, which will come out before COP, this community dimension will be very strong. So back to you, Lisa. I hope that was set out the outline. Thank you.
Perfect, great. That's really excellent, and some really interesting thoughts there. Going to pick up on a couple of those a bit later. Perhaps we could talk about the green sovereign bond, because I know that more details about that are coming out imminently. And I know Andy was talking just earlier before the call started about more development capital and risk capital that's needed to get some of these community projects off the ground as well. So I think we'll pick up on a couple of those points in a minute. So just going to give some highlights of the great report that was done by the IPPR called the Climate Commons. We'll send a link round, and it's about how communities can thrive in a climate changing world. And building on what Nick has said, I think there are some of the key points are there are opportunities as well as threats when it comes to the climate crisis and communities. So there is an opportunity to reshape local areas in a way that improves health and well-being, tackles inequalities and improves quality of life. There will be great impact on people and communities, perhaps far more than to date, in terms of the next wave of decarbonisation. And so obviously we've got to engage communities and bring them along on the journey as well. There's already great progress that's being made, and we're going to look at some examples of those in terms of local projects, what's being done in terms of wind and solar, community land trusts, local food cooperatives, low carbon homes, etc. So some great examples to talk about. One point is that climate action isn't often the primary goal for many successful community-led initiatives, and emission reductions are often a co-benefit. I think that's quite an interesting point. At present, we are neither making the most of the opportunities available, nor managing the unequal negative impacts of the climate crisis and the transition. So we're too dependent on top-down policies, and that perhaps we need more market-based solutions, and we need to also look at behavioural change to really get to those targets. And then for communities to thrive in this changing world, they have to be given greater ownership, not just over the process of the transition, but of the assets and the benefits that arise from those. So I think those are really good points from the report. There's some key findings, and there's a lot more work to be done in terms of, I think, equality, inclusion and diversity, to make sure that we are really taking everyone on the journey with us. And perhaps any of the organisations speaking could sort of mention that point and how you're helping to try and address that. That volunteer engagement is absolutely crucial for these organisations, but actually we can't just rely on voluntary support all the time, and that we need to better resource people, both so that they have really strong organisations internally, but also looking at getting better external support and professional support, particularly in terms of complex planning issues and legal issues, so that we can make sure that the vast proportion of these projects are actually successful, because so much work is put into these projects. So that's just a flavour of what the report outlines. So picking up on that, then, we need to obviously grow the number of organisations, we need to scale them, and we need to take it to a whole new level. So I'd like to next introduce Rick, who's going to talk about Carbon Copy and the work that you're doing to scale for success. So over to you, Rick.
Thanks very much, Lisa. And Angie, if I may just connect some of the points you were just talking about when you were recapping the report, the Community Commons report, because one of the key takeaways for me is the literal ownership by communities of various assets. But I think there's also a wider figurative ownership in terms of involvement in the local climate action plan. And so I think it's very important to appreciate the context in which communities, as well as companies, are leading on local climate action. And that context is the local climate action plan that has been stewarded by the council in consultation with key stakeholders, because that provides the framework against which all these initiatives are taking place. And as we know, just in terms of giving you a few key statistics, we have across the whole of the UK about 380 principal councils. 3/4 of those have declared an ecological and climate crisis. But 3/4 of those who have declared have since gone on, in collaboration with local stakeholders, to set a net zero target of 2030. So that's 20 years ahead of national. And that's just one indication of the level of ambition that there is at a local level. If you look at it another way, over half of all these local climate action plans cover the entire local area. So again, these are not plans that are simply to do with the council specific assets. These are plans that cover everybody that are living in the local area. And perhaps the most exciting statistic, because we have mapped all the, we've gathered together all the local climate action plans into one place. It's on carboncopy.eco. It's a freely available resource for people to look at. And the most exciting statistic for me is that across the UK, we have over 100 local authority areas that have set a net zero target of 2030 for the whole of their local area. So in each of those areas, clearly we need to have all the stakeholders coming together and to work in a very ambitious way, because it's a very exciting target. And to be honest, we're not really sure how we're going to get there, but that doesn't stop us from having that kind of a stretch target. And I think having those kind of stretch goals then helps focus minds, helps people to go further faster. So from a carbon copy perspective, where we're very much looking at the importance and the role of collective local action within the bigger framework of systemic change, it's very exciting to see this level of ambition playing out. So I think that's one important context in terms of when people are leading with various projects, how does that tie in with their local climate action plan? Because often what they are doing are integral components of it. And the opportunity to tie back to what Nick was saying earlier is to figure out how this connective tissue comes together, how we actually make the various stakeholders that are essentially working in tandem to work a bit more closely and cohesively together. One of the things that we're doing at Carbon Copy is we are encouraging people to share what they are doing so that we have a hub so we can just accelerate the real world learning and practices that are happening, because it's pretty much happening all at the same time and we don't have time to reinvent the wheel. So the opportunity in terms of scaling is in part one of how do we better share the knowledge, that's practical knowledge that people are gaining in real time. So we're just about to hear from three really great people leading three very different initiatives. That's exactly the kind of thing that, from a carbon copy perspective, we want to broadcast to encourage other people to copy or adapt. When we look at, we've got over 100 or so initiatives that have been published by people leading the projects. And when we kind of look at some of the common threads across that set, I think there's a couple of things worth highlighting. One is that not everybody undertakes these initiatives in order to address the climate crisis directly. It can be a consequence. So for instance, there's examples, for instance, of people looking to alleviate, say, food poverty in their local area. And that has benefits in terms of how they do so, in terms of reducing environmental impact, etc. And I think that's a really important point to make, because when we look at how we talk to people beyond the eco bubble, we need to appreciate that a lot of these initiatives that do have a positive impact and in terms of addressing the climate are done so for other reasons. So this notion of co-benefits, we may even think a bit more broadly about potentially addressing the climate crisis as the benefit of something that is a more immediate priority within the local community or local area. So that's quite an exciting way of extending the reach and involving more people in this overall aim that we have. And the other observation I have in terms of what people are sharing with us is to try and draw out what some of the key drivers of change are. How are people enabling this collective action to happen? Certainly, funding is one, and that's clearly something we're going to come back to and talk about the various ways that you can get funding for projects. But it's also interesting to see how people are taking an approach that leads perhaps on, say, education, and education being the key driver. There are other initiatives where people are just leading through inspiration. Other people, it's almost like a build it and they will come type of mentality. So there's some very different ways in which people are taking action. I think the most encouraging takeaway for me is that people are acting now. Clearly there's a real urgency behind doing so. And what I see at the local level is we are getting ahead. And I'm hoping that that will send a strong signal in terms of up to policymakers that clearly we need a more positive policy environment, but people aren't waiting for that to happen. And so lots of very inspirational stories. And I do encourage people to go and have a look on Carbon Copy. The intent really being not only to be inspired by what people see there, but if you can, copy and adapt, copy and adapt it.
Perfect. Great. That's excellent, Nick. And I think that gives a really great backdrop to the organizations to introduce themselves and say a bit more about what they're doing. And yeah, absolutely builds on what Nick was saying, and also what the report also has published. So we'll go Andy first from Beck, and then we'll go Helen, Kindling, and then we'll go Marianne, People Power Retrofit. So if you'd like to give us a spin around your organisation, that would be brilliant. Andy?
Okay, thanks, Lisa. Yeah, hello everybody. My name's Andy O'Brien. I'm a director and co-founder of Bristol Energy Cooperative. We're established back in 2011. So actually next month we're 10 years old. So yeah, that's something to celebrate. But it's also scary when you think what we need to do in the next 10 years in comparison with what we've managed to do in the previous 10 years. So yeah, lots to get on with. So yeah, our mission when we set up was to invest in renewables, cut carbon and build community. And we are a community benefit society. So we've now got over 1,000 members, and we've so far raised over £14 million for our projects. We've got 16 projects, vast majority of them solar. We do rooftop solar, solar farms. We've also got a battery storage project. And of that money that we've raised, about half of that's come from the community sector through shares and bonds. Quite a lot of that has actually been raised through the Ethex platform, so thanks to Ethex. And then the other half has come through more sort of traditional bank loans and also some loans from social funders. So our projects run to make a return, to make a return to our investors, but also because we're set up as a community benefit society, as I said, we provide physical, environmental, social benefits to that community. So so far we've facilitated over £250,000 of funds that have gone directly to the local community. We have our own community benefit fund where we share with another co-op, local co-op, that local people can apply for funding to actually do their own schemes that have some sort of renewable or environmental yeah, it's based on having an environmental benefit. So yeah, that's a key part of what we do. So yeah, we've done quite a bit in terms of how we do it. Well, we've got 3 people who are employed, so I'm fully employed by the co-op. We've also got a couple of the staff who we pay who prefer to work contracted. So yeah, we do have paid staff now. It's taken us a while to get there, but we do know that if we are going to scale up, we need to have a much bigger office and staff grouping than we currently do. So at the moment we're developing more solar, a hydro scheme, and also some very innovative microgrid projects, which are really quite cutting edge. And the other thing we're doing, and we felt this is actually something we started back in 2016, we helped set up an organisation called Zero West. And this is a collaboration to accelerate the zero carbon transition in our part of the world, in the west of England. And it's bringing together the commercial sector, the community sector, and the 4 West of England local authorities. Because back then we just felt there wasn't collective action with all these people linking together, and there wasn't really a plan, and there wasn't any clarity about how anybody was actually going to deliver a plan to any sort of time frame. So we brought lots of people together who we knew about, or who other people had recommended us. Got about 100 different people and organisations in a room to say, come on, how can we do this better? And through that, we actually set up a community interest company, and that's up and running now. And it's beginning to do some really quite interesting things. As ever, it needs funding. We've done it on a shoestring. We're constantly asking the commercial sector to put some money in. They never quite do it. So yeah, it's a model that I think could be used anywhere across the country. And we can see there's some real examples of just when you bring people together in a room, magical things happen, because different people have got different assets, whether that's financial assets, whether it's personnel assets, knowledge, skills. It just needs bringing together. So yeah, we all know we need to scale up to meet this net zero challenge. And for us, collaboration is key, innovation is key. So there are challenges, but there are also huge opportunities. And it's fascinating to work in this sector. What's going on, what you see happening on a daily basis, and the changes and the enthusiasm, especially over the last year, you really see it picking up. And you see business beginning to really step up. And I think for them, for big businesses, I think they know in a way how to do some of this, but for smaller businesses, I think they may be struggling to know quite how they can get involved, or they don't necessarily have the in-house staff to do their own sort of carbon assessments. So they're the sort of organisations that we want to work with. And also, obviously, what government needs to be doing is giving them a lot more support than the government currently does. And just to be a bit negative for a minute, the community energy sector does work on a shoestring. It's been battered over the last few years by government policy. And there's so many people out there who had good stuff going that they've had to stop. It doesn't make sense financially right now because the incentives still aren't there. We still know there are incentives out there for fossil fuels, but the incentives for renewables and for community sector stuff, where you work very hard on a shoestring to get stuff going over a number of years, that support isn't there right now. So very recently, the Environmental Audit Committee did an inquiry and interviewed lots of community energy practitioners about how that sector could be improved, how we could remove the barriers which are stopping the sector going forward. So the committee chair has now written, there's a report out now. He's written to the government minister for base on this with a whole lot of really good recommendations. I think we're going to circulate the link that you can read the chair's letter. So that's gone off to base, and their initial response, to be honest, was lukewarm. I think that's the best I can say. So they really need to step up. They're easy wins, quick wins, cheap wins in comparison with what we spend on all sorts of other things. And the government just needs to get its act together on that one. And then the other area where we really like to see things move, and this is around the collaboration around the finance, is the commercial sector. So I mentioned, we do collaborate as much as we can, but on the whole, where we've raised money from a sort of a crowdfunding point of view, it's mainly been from the general public. And what we really want is for business to be coming on board more, investing in those sort of schemes, but also providing some of that risk capital, development capital, which is hard to do on the straight, like Ethex fundraise. We're tending to be coming with a project which is pretty much ready to go, but that's taken like maybe 2 years to get to that stage. And we need businesses to come in and offer patient capital that will help us to develop those schemes in a much quicker way than we're currently doing, because it takes such a long time, and there's so many people who haven't got ready access to that sort of patient capital.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. I think that's a brilliant summary of your great work that you've done so far and that you continue to do, modest as ever. So thank you for everything that you do. And I'm also really interested to hear about Zero Waste as well, which sounds like a really innovative approach to, I mean, it seems very sensible, right, to bring all those players in the room together. And I think you're right to get commercial businesses to start collaborating more with communities is absolutely essential in the absence of, stronger policy from governments. So let's pick up on that risk capital point again in a bit, but in the meantime, let's move over to Helen at Kindling. Helen, if you'd like to give us a whistle stop of your organisation and what you've been doing.
Yeah, thank you. Really interesting to hear from Andy, and loads of similarities actually in terms of kind of where we kind of came from, of getting everyone in the room, the kind of buyers and the growers and all that sort of thing, to try and solve the problem of our hugely unsustainable mainstream food system. So basically, Kindling Trust has been going for about 13, 14 years. And we've just set up Kindling Farm and are hoping to buy a farm to establish a blueprint for food and farming. But basically, over the last decade, we've been running a number of practical food and farming initiatives with the aim of creating a fairer and more sustainable food system. And that's just hugely important for lots of reasons that I'm sure you're all very aware of, but a big one being that the food and farming system is responsible for over 25% of our carbon emissions. That it's really, really hard for sustainable farmers to make a living and to cover their own cost of production. And at the same time, we've got people not able to afford to, feed their own families, never mind choose ecologically and socially just food. And what we feel is we need to be able to have a food system that is, where people, it's not just the privilege that get to eat good food, it's the right of everyone. But at the same time, we can help our farmers to make a living, and we can stop having such a negative ecological impact. So basically the way we're trying to do this is through a number of projects, which is training a new generation of farmers up in ecological farming. It's creating the markets that are fairer markets for their produce. And also increasing access through we've set up a couple of cooperatives that engage restaurants, but also the University of Manchester and schools, and also the members are growers, so it's creating understanding throughout the food supply system. And then we've got a VegBot scheme, and also do social prescribing and wellbeing work, and lots of community engagement, and in a way of trying to make it more accessible. And to bring people with us. I'm not sure who it was that said this, but we have to, there's a real temptation of with the crisis that we've got in terms of biodiversity and climate change, to just go, we need to change this as quickly as possible. But unless we engage people, we're not going to change it. The change isn't going to be sustainable and long term. So the next stage of what we're doing is we're looking for a 100+ acre farm where we're going to have this blueprint for food and farming through agroforestry, which I won't even start on because I'll be here all day, but growing veg and cereals between rows of trees, also doing Centre for Social Change to kind of support the change makers and engage communities, and a social enterprise hub. And a really crucial part of all of this is that it's going to be owned by the community, by its members. So at the moment we've got this shameless plug in the background, but we've got a community shares campaign running on Ethex. It's just until Saturday, so have a look. Oh, Skype's going, sorry. Yeah, so and the idea is that basically we together as a community of members buy this farm and create this different food system together. And the reason that we think investment and community shares is important is because basically if people invest rather than donate money, they're kind of more likely to stay engaged and to want the farm to succeed, but also more likely to want to change things on a larger scale and replicate it on a wide scale, which is part of the whole aim of what we're doing. We want little kindling farms or equivalents all over the country.
Thanks, Helen. Marion, over to you.
Hello. Thank you for asking me to speak on this panel. There's some obviously really interesting stuff going on all over the country. And it's kind of nice to be on a panel with someone else from Manchester as well, to be honest. Hey, Helen. Our focus at People Powered Retrofit is really on everyone's homes. As I'm sure a lot of people will be aware, about 20% of our carbon emissions in this country are to do with running our homes, heating and lighting and powering them. And that's partly due to the fact we have some of the worst housing stock in the whole of Europe. It's leaky, it's not very well insulated. And we're also still mostly running it off fossil gas boilers. So we clearly need to do something about that. And it will require a scale of work and a scale of ambition that's much greater than what's been done to date. And that there have been improvements over the last 20 years. We have made our housing stock more efficient, but it's not enough for getting to where we need to meet our climate change commitments. And it requires a degree of a holistic view that probably hasn't been done to date either. We've kind of viewed homes as a kit of parts. So you swap one thing out, you swap an old inefficient boiler out, you put a more efficient boiler in, jobs are good. And it's actually, to get to the next stage, it's going to be a bit more complicated than that. And I think, as people have already talked about as well, it's not just about carbon emissions. For a lot of people who are interested in doing work in their homes, it's also about making them more comfortable, making them healthier. For some, it's about fuel poverty and simply being able to afford to run their home in a way that keeps them safe and warm. There have been, over the years, and there continue to be, this year there's quite a large programme for tackling some of these issues in social housing. But there hasn't been that much that has had that much success to date, at least with private householders. So far, the people who've done some of the scale of work that's required have tended to be pioneers and people who've been willing to become experts themselves. And we think it's a bit unrealistic to expect that of everyone. Obviously, there have been things like the Green Homes Grant and the Green Deal, which haven't exactly been great adverts for retrofit, and we believe haven't tackled some of the issues, which aren't necessarily just about finance, although that is part of it. But there are people who have money and want to invest in their homes, but they're really uncertain of what to do, don't want to make a mistake, make anything worse, end up with damp problems, that kind of thing. And they also struggle to find the people both to advise on it and to carry out the work. So people-powered retrofit is really a response to that. It's something that we've been piloting for the last couple of years in Manchester between the organisation that I've worked for the last 10 years or so, Urbed, who I'm an architect by training, so we've got a lot of technical expertise, understand a lot of what needs to be done to make retrofit work technically, alongside Carbon Co-op, who are a community benefit society, and they've done a lot of work on engagement and systems and how they're actually a member-based organisation as well, people who want to do something about climate change. So people-powered retrofit is being set up to kind of offer specialist advice in this particular area. We know it works. We know that there's an interest in it. We've helped to deliver projects. We've currently got about 70 clients in the service. So it's a service that we've been designing. But what we really need to do now is scale that up. And that's about building the technical expertise and also building the capacity in the supply chains, and especially the local supply chains. So finding builders, finding roofers, getting them to understand what's required to install insulation and to make sure that buildings are properly draft proofed. I think there's the slightly unique thing about people-powered retrofit as compared with some of the schemes that have gone before. We're kind of trying to tackle both the technical barriers, but also look at supply and demand at the same time. I think previously there's been what just happened with the Green Homes Grant was there was an awful lot of demand, but maybe not enough infrastructure to meet that demand in the supply chain. So we're kind of working on both. And in terms of what's required, we think in this area of investment is really to help build that infrastructure to support that service, to get more people who are skilled as assessors and surveyors and designers and installers. Because if you do that, then that really unlocks the potential for all of those people who are sat there with maybe money in savings account or money in pension pots that they'd like to invest in their homes. They're then able to do that with a bit more confidence. And I would say on the climate justice and the just transition thing that's been mentioned, I think the really good thing about retrofit is that it does have a lot of these co-benefits. So we're tackling carbon emissions, but we're also tackling employment. We're providing kind of skilled jobs that are local. Like, this has to happen everywhere that there are houses. And we are kind of conscious of that and looking to not just, obviously we can only kind of work so far in our local area, but we're partnering with other community energy organisations to replicate what we're doing elsewhere. One of them being Cumbria Action for Sustainability. We're kind of looking to replicate elements of the service with them. So yeah, we're kind of at the point where we know what we'd like to do. We're just trying to build on it and scale it in the next kind of 5 years or so.
Brilliant. Thank you, Marianne. Great. And I hope that's not an alarm meaning you're supposed to get out the building.
No, there's construction work going on over the road.
Okay, good. No problem. So brilliant. Awesome overview there. We're going to talk about some of these things in more detail, and I'm going to fire some questions around to everybody as well. So I think I'm really curious about the environmental audit committee's recommendations and why that fell so flat with BEIS, when clearly there seems to be, a growing evidence base that communities and people-powered organisations need to take a much bigger role in this transition. Nick, coming to you, maybe unfairly, but you're involved in a lot of policy work. Why do you think that it's getting such a flat response?
Perhaps, it's sad, and it's really good that Rick brought that to our attention. I think one of the things is potentially policymakers like to think about large, easy to deliver, low transaction cost, big things. And obviously, one of the challenges of community energy is by nature necessarily quite decentralized and small in that sense. So I think that the challenge is to show how that community energy across the country has that huge impact, and not just community energy, but other forms of community enterprises we've heard from Kindling Farm and so on, and how that all adds up to delivering the scale of the impact in terms of nature and energy and society. So I think there may be a perception issue at stake, and I think therefore the question that we've been discussing is actually not only how do individual enterprises in different countries, different parts of the country dealing with different things sort of be successful, how do they come together as we heard in sort of Zero West, and how does that achieve that scale so that community enterprise is seen as a core strategy for delivering on net zero goals. I think that's perhaps potentially a perception issue. And also, I think therefore we need to think about what are the particular policy tools. The British Business Bank is there to support British SMEs. What is their role here? We have this new UK Infrastructure Bank. One of their roles is net zero and supporting local authorities. How could that then flow into community energy? What is the role of all these different funds, Levelling Up Fund and Prosperity Fund and so on? So I think there's a particular piece of actually being very, very detailed about the particular policy tools that would really enable this scaling up to happen.
It sounds as though perhaps the sector needs quite a lot more firepower as well, to help promote what they're doing, and also, like you say, connect the dots between all of the different organizations, and hopefully work that you're doing, Rick, is also helping to accelerate that. Is that, do you see that your end goal, your purpose would be to help to influence policy?
Yes, but indirectly. So first and foremost, the intention is for like-minded practitioners to benefit from one another's experiences, to encourage those people that maybe 1 or 2 stages behind to catch up. It's a multi-local approach where we're very much focused on action and helping those people that have that first-hand experience share it more widely. I think as a result of that, it just increases the momentum behind change, and that does guide solutions. That does influence some of the top-down policy making, not least when you have this level of community involvement. When you start to get this ownership, either literally or figuratively, then policymakers and local politicians are in part of the solution, but are also very influenced by this groundswell. So we are not, as a charity, driven by influencing policy directly, but we very much want to showcase all these great examples as a way to influence it.
Okay, so scale and speed seem to be quite important to perhaps get us to a point where the solutions that you're presenting are better recognised and can get integrated into policy in a more proactive way. And Andy, you talked about the problem of lack of risk capital and the time it takes you to get projects off the ground. Are you seeing any movement from some of the commercial organisations that you spoke about, or the banks, to play a part in providing some of that risk capital?
Yes and no. I mean, we're working with some really quite innovative, smaller commercial organisations who could help us in this regard. But in terms of, say, mentioning the banks and whatever, I don't know if any of you were listening to Mark Carney yesterday when he was, as part of this Climate Action Forum event, he was talking yesterday, and the person interviewing was the head honcho for environmental stuff for HSBC. So they were getting loads and loads of publicity out of all that, but we don't have any contact with those sorts of organisations. I doubt they've even thought about community energy.
Right.
So there's this gap, I think, between what's happening at the top and what's actually happening at the bottom. And it's, as you said, really, it's something about perception. Maybe they just don't think we're doing very much. It's not really worth it. It's piddly. I don't know.
So we're certainly seeing more movement amongst the foundations, I think, and more philanthropic capital. So, Ethex has brought on 3 match funders in the last year. So we've got $1.5 million to blend in alongside the crowd, which certainly helps to provide a boost. And, I hope we'll see a lot more of that. But you're right, there's that early stage capital, which is really necessary. And I'm sure, Helen, you've also, you struggle in terms of, that early stage development money to get the projects off the ground. And when projects take 2 or 3 years, for each one, obviously, it limits the amount that you can do at one time. Is there anything, Helen, you are seeing from your perspective that could help to provide more funding to that area?
I mean, I think the way that we've set up our community share model is that people don't, and someone's sort of brought this up a bit in the chat as well, we ask people not to withdraw in the first 3 years, and you don't get interest in the first, I think it's 2.5 to 3 years. And one of the reasons for that is that it just really helps you to find your feet, because the start of any business, and especially food and farming, it can be quite a while before you make that profit. So actually just lowering the amount that we take in loans, and taking more from community shareholders makes loads of sense. yeah, I think, and I think also other funders, in terms of our development costs, funders are excited by this. They're excited by the fact that so many people are showing that they believe in what we're all doing, and I've no doubt that it will happen for Carbon Co-op as well, or the retrofit. You know, that people are just like, yeah, this is great, and we need to support you in making this happen. And people understand that it takes a long time to do something like this. I think that's the feedback we're kind of getting.
Amongst the sort of social investment wholesalers, there is recognition that patient, flexible and affordable capital is very much needed. And I think that we just need to mobilize more of it to help in this early stage funding. And perhaps that's a call out that perhaps we need to do as an industry to try and get more support at early stages. Just thinking about, on the flip side, we're hearing from government that, there's going to be this green bond that's issued, and, that's going to get potentially millions and billions of pounds into, no doubt, large scale projects. What do you think the reception of that will be, Nick? How does that fit in with what we're talking about, which is a much more inclusive, localized sort of system?
Well, I think the two are very compatible. So the government has committed to issue £15 billion of green sovereign bonds. So that's debt that the government has used to pay for what it needs to do on green. And this is going to be both in a way that pension funds can buy, but there's also going to be a green savings product as well that people could buy as individuals. And we've been working with the government and sort of inputting into its ideas, so that what we find quite exciting is the government is committed to actually report on the social co-benefits of this green spending, both, and this could be things like job creation, so the retrofit thing would come in really nicely there, but also this phrase sort of leveling up. So I think a really exciting thing, this is going to be a series, not a one-off, is then being able to see how does this public raising of capital, how does that then drill down to the community level? How could some of this money that is raised in a green sovereign bond, how would that then sort of filter down to community enterprises and so on through government public spending? So it'd have to be linked to public spending plans, but that could be retrofit plans, that could be renewables rollout plans, that could be nature-based solutions and agriculture and so on. But I would see the two as being connected.
Yeah, well, I think we'd all like to see some of that trickle-down effect. I shall hold my breath and see whether that happens, although I'm sure we'll have to wait some years to see that. Now, listen, we could talk forever here, and I feel like we were just getting going, so apologies that we've run out of time already. Perhaps we'll have to have a step 2 session, but I just want to say thank you very much to all of our panelists today. Sorry if we didn't get to talk as much as we would like to have done. And fantastic congratulations to everyone for all the fabulous work that you're doing as well. And I hope very much that we can help support you do a lot more of it as well. And Nick, thank you to you for bringing the sort of more policy approach to us today. So thank you everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If there's any other questions, sorry if we haven't got to them, and we can always respond individually. So thanks again, and join you again for another Cuppa Club soon. Thanks everybody. Bye.
Thank you.